One of the easiest things to forget about video is how dense it is. And so how easily the working memory of viewers is overloaded, right? If you're watching 15 minutes of video, without pause, or even 5 minutes of video without pause to process, right, you're not going to remember much of it.
Welcome to the Cutting Edge Coaching Podcast, where we believe coaches are some of the most important teachers and leaders in the world, and they deserve to be supported. I'm your host, Luke Gromer, and every week we're bringing you conversations with coaches, experts, and leaders from across sports that will give you practical ideas and strategies that you can apply in your coaching to develop high-performing teams and high-character people. Coaches, I'm excited to welcome my good friend Doug Lemov back to the podcast. Doug is a former teacher and school leader, the founder of Uncommon Schools, and the author of The Coach's Guide to Teaching, among other books on teaching and learning. He helps teachers and coaches improve at their craft. In this conversation, we talk about the 7 deadly sins of film as a preview for our upcoming online workshop, Film for Coaches. It's a 90-minute interactive online workshop where we're going to dive deep into how to use film effectively to increase the learning and development of your players and teams. We're already sold out of all 40 spots for the first workshop, but you can still go to filmforcoaches.com or click the link in the show details to learn more or join the wait list for the next workshop, which will give you the first opportunity to sign up. And as always, if you enjoyed the episode and want to grab a copy of the free podcast notes, just go to cuttingedgecoach.com/podcast or click the link in the show details to download a free PDF from this episode or any episode of the podcast. Now to my conversation with Doug Lemov. Enjoy the episode. Coaches, welcome back to the podcast, and excited to welcome back a familiar guest, Doug Lemov. Doug and I are planning an online workshop that Doug proposed to me around the use of film and using film effectively. So, Doug, let's just start off there, and you tell the audience why you think this is such an important topic for coaches.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think it's one of the least examined changes in the experience of an athlete in recent years, which is, the proliferation of video. Just taping something used to be really logistically difficult, and you'd have to hire someone with a giant camera, and they'd show up and they'd tape something, and then they'd disappear for 10 days, and then they'd send you a DVD. PS, remember DVDs, right? And then you'd wheel in the TV and watch the DVD, and then the idea of editing that and sharing thoughts, it was just logistically hard. And suddenly, you've got your phone, you can tape something right away, send the clip immediately to someone else. I was watching a training session for a soccer team the other day, and the coach was videotaping players on an iPad while they're playing, and pause the session and say, "Great, guys, gather around. Let me show you yourselves playing. What do you see? What do you notice?" And so just the accessibility of video on the field, but mostly off the field, it's constant for players now. It's a huge part of their lives, and that's potentially valuable, I think. But I also think that just watching video is very different from learning from video, and that players are, and that while it creates a great opportunity, there are also maybe some missed opportunities there. And sometimes I think we presume that if we, show 15 examples of X or Y or Z to players, that they'll have learned from it. And I don't think that that's necessarily true in a lot of cases. So the idea was let's talk about how we use video to build player learning.
Yeah, I love it. And I agree on so many fronts. And as I was thinking about the workshop and thinking about this conversation, I just kind of jotted down a list of what I would consider deadly sins of using film. These are things where coaches tend to get it wrong or use film, and it just isn't that effective because of some of these things. And so the first one that I put down was this is film sessions with your team that are random or what I would kind of consider non-topical. And by that, I mean, you get your team together and you watch film that is not necessarily related to each other. So maybe you have a bunch of different clips, or maybe you just watch 5 minutes of a game. And during that 5 minutes, you're just pointing out and trying to teach over or in the middle of this film session that is just this string of play.
Hmm.
Or, like I said, you've got 10 or 15 different clips of potentially unrelated things, and you're hitting a clip, talking about it, going to another clip, talking about that. And I think this is something that is just honestly a waste of time often for coaches and players, because the coach probably put a lot of time into preparing this film
Yeah.
session, and the players are watching and they're getting hit with so much stuff. And then at the end of it, the coach is expecting them to be better at these things or to have retained all of it, and they haven't, and they won't.
Yeah.
What are your
I
thoughts
think
on that?
that's just, yeah, no, I think it's really smart what you just, which is one of the easiest things to forget about video is how dense it is. And so how easily the working memory of viewers is overloaded, right? If you're watching 15 minutes of video, without pause, or even 5 minutes of video without pause to process, right, you're not going to remember much of it. And so I think that's a lot of where I was going with this idea of like, just because people are watching it doesn't mean they're learning anything from it, right? So video is like, it's information intense. There are multiple stories. There's 1,000 things you could pay attention to at once. So I think one of the smartest things that coaches can do, like just like a little, it's like whiskey, a little bit goes a long way. So we want to like slow down and have small doses. So showing a really short video, maybe show it once, just so maybe my deadly sin here is showing a clip just once, right? Show it once just to let players orient themselves. The first time they watch it, if it's of them, they're like, which play is this? How do I do, potentially, how's my hair? I don't know, whatever, like who knows what they're thinking about. Or if it's someone else, like, who is this? What level, just what's happening in this game. And so you can't really process for details when you're just trying to orient yourself. So maybe play it once just to let players get a general sense for it. Great. Would you notice what's happening here? Great. Now let's go through carefully. Let's watch again, and I'm going to ask you to unpack some of the details of what's happening here. And so that gives players the opportunity to really to really study the film and use it for what it's best for, which is hopefully unlocking perceptive cues and knowledge of the game.
Yeah, that's good, and I totally agree. That was another thing I jotted down is if we just show the film clip once, it's just so fast, honestly. Most of the time, our
Right.
clips are 10, 15 seconds. And the thing, again, is as the coaches, we put this together, we've watched the clip 5, 6 times probably, and it's
Yeah.
their first time seeing it. And
Yeah.
that's
So,
really
so
significant.
we're like, did you see? We're like, did you see that? Did you see that? And the answer is no. They did not.
Yeah.
They did not see it.
Yeah.
The thing that you're paying attention to in the clip when you've seen it 6 times, right? You are literally watching a different clip from what
Yeah.
they're watching. So
Yeah.
really slowing it down, showing it twice. Also, I would add like guiding players' attention to like pay attention to the defensive shape, the path. What happens with the passing lane. You don't have to. You can. There are different ways you can guide without sort of like giving things away, but at least directing players to like where to focus your attention in this
Yes.
clip.
I think that's so true. And I think I would add this as far as that first one I shared around random or non-topical film sessions
Mhm.
is that one of the things that I've seen and experienced both as a coach and as a player is scout film, right? Especially depending on the
Mhm.
level you're at. So the higher level you go, the more often coaches are showing film of the opponents to their players. And often that can end up being just a like hodgepodge of different things
Mhm.
of the opponent they're going to play. And so it's like, all right, here are the, depending on sport, it might differ, right? But here are the 5 or 6 different actions that they run and they're really good at. And we just show them all to our athletes. We're like, all right, now I've shown you what they do. Um, in some way, it's almost like a cover my butt, like I quote unquote prepared them. But then
Yeah.
again, it's like, it's just so much so fast. And it's okay. Like maybe you're going to look at some opponent scout film, and that might be totally
Yeah.
appropriate for your level. And maybe you're going to look at 3 things that they do. Well, that's fine. Just like chunk those into 3 different things and
Yeah.
have clips for each of those things instead of like, all right, here's one thing, here's another thing, here's another thing. And we just go through this list of things that, again, as coaches, it's like we want our athletes to be prepared. It's with the best of intentions, but it's not really coherent for them as they're taking it in. It, again, just goes so fast. It's too much too quickly.
Yeah, well, and I think a big part of what you're talking about is preparation, which is like I know the clip that I want to show. That's part of my planning process. But part of my preparation process is, and what do I want players to learn from this? There will hopefully be things they learn that I hadn't anticipated, but I should be really clear on like, what do I want them to get out of it? Why am I showing them this? The other thing that I was thinking about when you were talking about that example was like, let's watch our opponent in scout film. Even in the best case scenario where I understood that as an individual, we're going to have to stop them as a team, most likely. And so one of the things that should happen is the team should talk to each other about like, pause. What are they doing here? How are they, what do you notice about their attacking shape? What do you notice about what they're trying to do with the ball? Turn and talk to your teammates, go, right? So that they're practicing talking to each other about what they notice in the opposition, so if we're going to expect them to work together and coordinate and communicate during the game to talk about the things that they notice in the opposition, if all they're doing is taking away individual episode, idiosyncratic takeaways, that's not going to be good enough. So we really have to like talking to each other is critical to have. It's not just individual understanding; it's shared understanding that I'm often seeking when I'm submitting video. So I think that's like we can add that to our list of the deadly sins.
Well, and that's actually that was number 3 and 4 on my list. Number 3 was no pause points, and you mentioned that in
huge.
there. Like we've got to have some strategic points in our film where we pause it, and usually that's the best time to ask a question or to start a discussion. And that was number 4, is that during a film session, too often a coach spends the whole time talking and there's no writing or discussing, questioning, sharing. Like it's just the coach's voice and the film. And I think we would both agree that's just not the most effective way to do it if we really want to engage them in learning while they're watching this video.
Yes, I think one of the things that you're describing here is the difference between understanding and learning, and the understanding is not learning. Understanding is temporary, right? So I could in that moment be like, oh, aha, I see. When they attack us, they're going to try and spread us out, and I understand 3 things about their attacking strategy, but almost everything that I understand in my life, I then forget, right? So now I have to think about, now that you understand it, I have to take the time to be like, great, write that down. Take a note to yourself. What's one thing you want to remember? Even if I never look at the notes, the process of writing down the notes causes me to remember it more, or talk to a teammate about it. What are the visual cues? This gets to your point about like the point where you stop the video is really important, because one of the great powers of video is that it helps us to study visual cues. Talk with your teammate or make a note to yourself, either one. What are the visual cues that tell us that they're going to try and, run, this play on us, or that they're going to be pressing they're going to be pressing high. Because unless they have the chance to sort of encode it in long-term memory, even if you get great insights, there's the risk that players will lose it, especially if it's just bang, 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 video after video or idea after idea. That means it's even more likely that they'll lose it. The more they understand, the more likely it is that they'll lose the things that they understand, ironically.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard. And, number 5 actually that I had jotted down was kind of continuing on that vein of writing and discussing, was not having pre-planned questions. I think you alluded to that earlier, but I think that if we go into a film session and we haven't carefully thought about what am I going to ask and when am I going to ask, I do this all the time in the classroom too. Like if I haven't planned it out, written it down, and thought about it, I'll probably just revert to whatever my most deeply held communication or questioning habit is. And I may not ask a high quality question, and I might not ask it in a way that actually engages them. So I think it's really important. One of the things we need to do is plan those questions out, or consider what am I going to ask and when and how, all of those things. Because I think too often we go into a film session and we haven't planned what am I going to ask, how am I going to ask it, when am I going to ask it.
Can I go like 2.0 on that? Because I think it's like linking the question to the pause point is super important, right? Where am I going to pause it? What do I want players to be looking at while they analyze the video, right? Especially if the visual cues are so important. But this is one thing I stole from watching a coach, an Australian rules football coach, which is when he pauses the video, the question is on the screen. So when he says, great, what do you notice? Or turn and talk to your teammate. What are you seeing here? Or what do you notice about the formation, their offensive formation? Or what do you notice about ourselves and our shape playing out of the back? Players are constantly reminded of what they're supposed to be talking about. It's really easy to forget the question if someone if someone says it to you verbally and you're watching a video and you're trying to concentrate on it and you're talking to someone else about it, especially if the person makes up the question on the spur of the moment, it's not that precisely worded. And so like maybe you say it 2 or 3 times to try and get it out right. And now who knows whether players are actually thinking about or talking about the question you wanted them to ask. So putting the plus, if you put the question on the screen, then players don't have to try and remember the question in their working memory, and their working memory can be entirely free to do analytical work. If my working memory is split between trying to remember the question that you asked and do analytical work, I'll just have less working memory free to focus on learning and understanding. So yes, plan the question. Yes, link it to a pause point in the video. And if you really want to go for the home run, have the question on the screen at the moment you want players to think about it, discuss it.
That's a really good tip there too. And yeah, again, there's so many video tools that we have at our disposal now that can allow you to do cool things like that. That's actually one of the things that we may talk about at the end a little bit, and it'll definitely be in the workshop. But that's one of the things that I've used in some of my film sessions is just writing or drawing on the video to show them things that I'm seeing conceptually or I understand conceptually that they might not, as far as maybe it's spacing or some sort of concept. And then even like you said, like put the question there too, right? So now 1, it's a reminder to you, I need to ask this. And then 2, they can see
Right.
it. It's worded much better. I think that's really, really good.
It's such a good point about it also holds you accountable to like stay true to the thing that you thought was most important that you wanted to talk about. You can always freelance after, but like it's really easy to forget the most important thing that you wanted players to take away.
Yeah. Absolutely. The next one I have, number 6, is length of time. And the deadly sin here is that often film sessions are too long. And so I'll share just this is totally my my opinion here, kind of my experience. I've talked to some other people about it that have shared similar things. But these are kind of the rules of thumb that I go by when it comes to film, is that if it is a brand new concept, 20 minutes max. If it's a brand new concept, I'll spend 20 minutes watching film. If it's a review, 10 or less is my goal. And yeah, I think there's several reasons for it. One, it's like we need to be concise. I think much more than that. And again, you're probably wasting some time, and how much is actually going to be retained. But those have been helpful rules of thumb for me. Again, if it's something new, okay, I got 20 minutes or less for this.
Yeah.
If it's a review, 10 minutes or less.
I think those are good rules of thumb. Could you do more if you were really good and if you made it really engaging and you were really like, I would rather you spend 30 minutes on one concept than than like 30 minutes on 3 concepts, right? Because I think you could go really deep. But I'm stealing this idea from you, by the way. One other thing I think is a rationale for short sessions is one of the other ways to cause understanding to turn into learning is to let players apply it right away on the court or on the field. And so there's a great video of you, by the way, that I just like you working with your young basketball players. And one of the things I noticed is like the video screen is right next to the court and you're watching it right before you walk out. Like this is what we're going to be doing in practice, right? So while it's hot in their minds and they understand the space and you're like, great, let's go do it, right? And so then if you brought in another concept and you're like, let's talk about one other thing. Well, then when you're like, great, let's go out on the court and do it, the original thing is no longer in their working memory. And so I really like the idea of like short, sweet, intense. Let's watch 3 or 4 examples of this. Let's understand it pretty well. Let's make sure we've got the vocabulary to talk about it. Now let's get out there and try it. And I think it's also, yeah. So I like your rules of thumb.
Well, yeah, and you just you stole number 7. That was the
I did.
deadly sin. That's great. Is no time or opportunity to apply the concept from the film. And so, and I know that context it depends here of what your context is like, what facilities are like. There's so many factors. Like this year, I mean, the school that I coach at our campus they're building another one. We didn't even have access to our gym on campus, so we're practicing at a rec center across the street. And if I want to watch film, I got to wheel a TV out. Like it's
Yeah.
not the ideal context to watch film. Um, but I think the important thing is here, regardless of your context and your situation, is the best that you can. Set it up in a way that after we watch film, I'm going to give them time to work on and apply the
Yeah.
things that we did. And so, like you said, whether it's watching on an iPad on the side of your court or your laptop, or you have a room or a classroom where you can watch film and then you can head right to the gym or the field, whatever it
Yeah.
is, but watch that, go through it. Again, and I would say, like, do
Yeah.
this at the beginning of your practice and then go work on that thing. And like you said, the things that I've done is I've done the film session and then we go straight to court and our focus is all around that concept. So if it's our offense or spacing, well, that's what we're working on now. If it's something like shot selection, well, we're going straight into playing games where I'm scoring it based on the quality of shots that they take, right? It is absolutely that we watch this film about this concept and now we're focused on applying it. I want them, we learn by doing, and now I need them to do that thing that we studied. And so I think that's one of the areas that we can get it wrong. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
if you're watching film at the end of your practice and your athletes don't have any time to go apply it, well, I don't think that's the best strategy there. Maybe there's a time and place for it, but I think
Yeah.
it's more powerful if we watch it and then they have time to apply it.
I agree. And maybe here's a workaround to like, well, I can't, for whatever reason, do it right away. You could study video for 20 minutes and make sure players really understand the concept, and then take one or two of those clips and send them to players on their phone. And you could say, watch them right before practice, right? And so then you get some, like, I think one other deadly sin probably has to do with retrieval practice, which is there's almost nothing that we can like learn, certainly learn as like encode as deeply as we need it when we need it fast in a game under pressure, like with distractions, in one iteration. So like I have a pretty good video session, players are starting to understand it. The better it goes, the more important it is to like come back to it. Like we're going to rewatch these videos on Wednesday. Same video, like watch it again on Wednesday to remind ourselves we'll see new things in it. But so if I showed video at the end of my session, maybe we have a really good video session. Choose the best video, send it to players on their phones, watch it right before practice, and then I'm like, okay, when we get out there, this is what we're going to be. I know, I want you to try and do this right away. So you can work a little retrieval practice into that as well.
Yeah, it's a great point. And honestly, that's one of the things that I was thinking about this the other day when I was planning one of my basketball practices. It's like, oh, wow, I haven't hit that concept recently. I need to hit it again. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that one of the great things is when you start using film in a more effective way. Um, let's say we have an initial film session where we teach this new concept to them, right? Maybe it's this principle of play, maybe it's whatever it is for your sport, right? And then we go work on that. Well, record your
Love
application
it.
of it. And
Yeah.
then let's chop up some clips from that. And now it's like, okay, right? And this is one of the things I think is important when you introduce something new. It's like you're giving them a video model for it. And
Yeah.
then we're going to go out and do it. I'm going to record that. And I can find some clips of, okay, this is when we do it really well. And this is when we absolutely just botched it, did not do it well. I'm going to show them some of both here. We'll see the differences. We can discuss it. I think that's the other really, really powerful piece of it is, we can come
Yeah.
back to these same concepts in film. And then again, really powerful when it's film of them now doing it,
Love it.
those concepts we're trying to grow in.
And I have one more suggestion for that, because I think that one of the real powers of video is that it can fill in what I would describe as like the black boxes in players' game perception. So, from a soccer perspective, when you pass a ball or you shoot or you try to, try to make a dribbling run, you get implicit feedback, which means like you have a pretty good sense for whether your pass was good or bad, right? Because like it goes where you want it to go, it like gets intercepted, right? You're constantly getting implicit feedback. But there are dark areas in the game that you never get implicit feedback on. Your movement off the ball to snap open into the right space. Like, do you look ready for the ball? Is your body shaped correctly? You actually don't get much. Sometimes you get implicit feedback, but it's harder to read. But for the most part, so your movement off the ball, you learn more slowly because you get much less implicit feedback on it. So if I'm going out to tape players, actually taping those dark areas, right? I want to tape you not on the ball with the ball, but I'm actually going to tape the guys who are away from the ball and show them, here's you away from the ball. Kevin's over here. What do you notice about yourself away from the ball? What do you see in yourself? Are these the things that we talked about? Score yourself A, B, or C, right? I think we can, with that idea of like, let's tape ourselves concepts, I'd say especially things where I don't get implicit feedback. I would imagine in basketball, like you shoot, you know whether your shot was decent because you get visual feedback on it right away. You probably are not as clear on like whether your spacing is right.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's the thing. That's the thing I'd want to videotape. Yeah, exactly. So I'd just be like, I don't even care where the ball is. I'm just filming you.
Oftentimes, your athletes are so unaware of that until they see it in video. Yes. They didn't even know that they were in absolutely the wrong spot for their team. And so, yeah, I think that's a great point.
And the beauty of a little bit of that is that then when my players are watching, now they're learning to watch away from the ball and watch off the ball because we've studied it together. And so it just makes them more sophisticated watchers of the game. And I think that's what, you could have two players who are watching the game and they could be watching totally different. One of them is learning and one of them is not. One of them's like, really studying away from the ball. And so I think we can socialize players' eyes for what the vocabulary of things that they can look for.
Yeah.
By taping more broadly too.
That's so good. Well, let me just recap those 7 deadly sins of film and the bonus that you added there at the end. And then we'll wrap it up. We said number 1, random or non-topical film sessions. Number 2, showing the clip just once. Number 3, no pause points. Number 4, the coach talking too much and there's not an opportunity for writing or discussion. Number 5 was failing to pre-plan your questions. Number 6 was going too long in your sessions. And number 7 was no time to apply the concept. And then that little bonus at the end was a lack of retrieval practice after. So coaches, if you enjoyed this episode, if you found those tips valuable and you are interested in the Film for Coaches workshop that Doug and I are hosting, we would love to have you be a part of it. There's only a few spots left, but you can go to filmforcoaches.com to learn more or register. If the first one fills up, we'll have a place where you can give us your information if you're interested in being part of it in the future. But we hope to see you in that workshop, and we're looking forward to the coaches that have already signed up. Doug, thank you so much for your time, and as always, love the conversation. Coaches, thanks for listening to this episode, and thanks to Doug for joining me. As always, if you enjoyed the episode and you want to grab a copy of the free podcast notes, go to cuttingedgecoach.com/podcast or click the link in the show details to download a free PDF of notes. And don't forget to check out filmforcoaches.com to learn more or join the waitlist for the next Film for Coaches workshop. The first workshop is already full, so join the waitlist today to have the first chance to register for the next one. That's filmforcoaches.com. Thanks for listening to the podcast.